This is Kim Bykowski. I am the project manager for the C-43 West Basin Storage Reservoir water quality component. We're going to give it another minute or two. We still have people joining the meeting, and then we'll get started. All right, looks like we have most everyone has joined the meeting. Again, this is Kim Bykowski. I'm the project manager for the C-43 West Basin Storage Reservoir water quality component. And we're going to present our siting evaluation update today. And I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Reynolds, who's our Division Director of Ecosystem Restoration and Capital Projects, to open up the meeting. Jennifer?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I apologize that I have a little bit of laryngitis, so I'll keep my remarks short. But I'm looking forward to this update. I just wanted to take a couple of moments to really thank everyone who's been involved in this process. Thanks to the working group, to members of our sister state agencies, to our consultants that have been really critical in this process, and also to the members of the public who have diligently participated and provided comments throughout this process. All of you are really critical in getting us to where we are today, and there is tremendous momentum with restoring the Everglades, delivering clean water south, reducing estuary discharges, and making sure that the water that is being delivered to the estuaries is clean. And that's part of what this project is all about. There's tremendous momentum as we work together to achieve those goals. So this is the next step in that process. And I'm looking forward to the presentation today, as I'm sure you all are as well. And we look forward to your comments at the end of the presentation as well. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Georgia for our presentation today. And thanks again for participating.
Thanks, Jennifer. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the project update meeting for the C-43 West Basin Storage Reservoir Water Quality Project. My name is Georgia Vince. I'm a consultant with JTech, and we are supporting the district on this very important project. Today, during the Zoom meeting, we're going to have a few question and answer sessions. So you can type any questions you have during the presentation into the Q&A box, or during the question sessions, you can raise your hand for comments and we will unmute you. Devin with IT at the district will unmute you, and then you can unmute yourselves and then ask any questions or make any comments at that time. So we really do look forward to your feedback and your input and your questions during the presentation today. For our agenda today, we're going to do a little bit of a project background to get everybody oriented and on the same page. We're going to talk about the siting of the water quality component and some constraints and opportunities. We'll discuss water conveyance for the alternatives that were selected last year. We're going to talk about updated water quality time series data and the results, load calculations, results, and water quality targets, and then updated sizing of the water quality component alternatives. We'll review a cost estimate, an updated cost estimate for a full-scale stormwater treatment area, and then we are going to discuss an inline in reservoir alum treatment system that is under development. The C-43 reservoir water quality study is being supported by several municipal entities within the region, and the following are our working group members. For South Florida Water Management District, the lead is Kim Fekoski, project manager. From the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, the working group representative is Edward Smith, director of the Office of Water Policy and Ecosystem Restoration. For Hendry County, Shane Parker is with us from the Public Works Department. Lee County, we have Roland Adelini, the Director of Natural Resources. From the City of Cape Coral, Maya Robert, Environmental Resource Division Manager. From the City of Sanibel, Holly Milbrandt, Director of Natural Resources. And Lehigh Acres Municipal Services Improvement District, Michael Cook, Assistant District Manager. The consultant team leading the study efforts is JTech, which is a joint venture between Jacobs Engineering and Tetra Tech. And you'll be hearing from the consultant team today during the presentation, including Sean Waldeck, Marcy Frick, Jim Bays, and myself, and Chris Keller with Wetland Solutions, Inc. We'd like to start with some background on the project for any new participants. So let's look at the big picture. So in January 2019, Governor DeSantis signed an executive order to greater the protection of Florida's environment and water quality. It included efforts to reduce harmful algal blooms, and specific to the topic today, it included a directive to study additional water quality treatment opportunities for water leaving the C-43 West Basin Storage Reservoir. For a quick orientation, the C-43 reservoir is located in western Hendry County. The reservoir currently under construction has 2 cells and is 10,000 acres in size. Cell 1 is on the left and cell 2 is on the right. The reservoir will intake and discharge water to and from the Townsend Canal. Generally, the reservoir will be filled and emptied once a year, storing water during the wet season and discharging water during the dry season to maintain prescribed flows to the downstream estuary. Note that the reservoir is located downstream of the S78 Ortona Lock and upstream of the S79 Franklin Lock structure. These are also water quality monitoring stations that will be discussed later in the presentation. So the primary objective of phase 1 of the study was to identify opportunities to provide additional treatment and improve water quality leaving the C-43 reservoir, utilizing alternative technologies with an emphasis on nitrogen removal. It is understood that the Caloosahatchee River and estuary are more at risk from high nitrogen concentrations rather than phosphorus. And during the study, we evaluated treatment technologies that may be implemented with the reservoir project, with the ultimate goal of identifying 3 alternatives that are compatible with the objectives of the C-43 reservoir project. The feasibility study evaluated pre-treatment prior to entering the C-43 reservoir options, in-reservoir treatment, post-storage treatment. The alternatives need to be cost-effective and technically feasible. We evaluated conventional and innovative treatment technologies and we looked at biological, chemical, and physical water quality treatment technologies. All technologies that we evaluated needed to be scalable and available for long-term technologies. The team evaluated, there are some studies constraints that working group and consultant team identified at the beginning of the study. We identified alternatives that cannot affect the congressionally approved C-43 West Basin Storage Reservoir project purposes, benefits, infrastructure, construction schedule, or operation, including minimum flows and levels and water reservations that apply to the operation of the reservoir. Project lands were not specifically identified for the feasibility study of the alternatives, and the C-43 reservoir and the selected treatment components are not intended to achieve compliance with the TMDL. The team evaluated over 38 water quality treatment technologies for the study that have been commonly used for water quality treatment. Of those 38 technologies, 25 were included in the literature review, which was further reduced to 10 technologies based on performance, compatibility, general land area requirements, residuals, and scalability, since the flows leaving the reservoir will generally be around 457 cubic feet per second. Rough order of magnitude costs were developed for the alternatives, which included capital, construction costs, and operation and maintenance. The final results of the water quality feasibility study presented to the public in December of 2020 identified the offline alum treatment system as the most effective, followed by bold and gold media, which is a tire crumb, sand, and clay combination, and combining that with a constructed wetland. Third was hybrid wetland treatment technology, which is a combination of alum and constructed wetland cells. Next is the sand filter and bold and gold combination. The sand filter is exactly as it sounds, where clean sand is used to filter the water, along with the bold and gold media combination. And the least cost-effective was the 5,000 acre STA. All of the study documents that I discussed today are available for your reading pleasure on the South Florida Water Management District website, listed at the bottom of the page. So in order to further evaluate the top ranked alternative, phase 2, to support the siting of the water quality component, was kicked off shortly after the completion of the feasibility study in December. This evaluation included South Florida Water Management District owned lands, as well as lands within the general vicinity of the C-43 reservoir. A detailed routing and siting evaluation was conducted for the 4 alternatives and the full-scale STA. Siting workshops were held with the South Florida Water Management District review team and the working group. Phase 2 of the study also includes further water quality analysis, water quality modeling to determine nutrient outflow concentrations leaving the reservoir, and evaluation of an in-reservoir alum application, which you will hear more about later in the presentation. For the opportunities and constraints for the siting evaluation, a desktop resource characterization was conducted to determine the compatibility with the proposed water quality component and was completed on March 25th. The siting study was evaluated ownership, right-of-ways, and easements in the area, as well as wetlands, protected species, cultural resources, contaminated sites, soils, land use, and existing water conveyance features. For the evaluation, opportunities are areas that are compatible with the proposed project shown in green. Avoidance areas are those conflicts that could be mitigated using certain measures, and those are shown in yellow. And exclusion areas represent the greatest potential for environmental, social, and economic impacts and are shown in red. The large red area to the south of the reservoir, which you'll probably notice first on the screen, is the Rodina planned development, and the hatched yellow area above the reservoir is a planned unit development. The map also includes the cultural resources and protected species constraints in yellow. And based on the desktop analysis and some site reconnaissance, the areas to the north and northeast of the reservoir are the best opportunities for citing the water quality component. Around the reservoir, there are some easements and right-of-ways that were considered in the siting. These include the C-43 Canal, State Road 80, the North Rim Canal, and South Agricultural Ditch, single-family homes between the two South Florida Water Management District-owned parcels with about 50 individual homeowners, the Banana Branch Canal with an FDOT maintenance right-of-way and a bridge, and Henry Canal and Murphy Groves, as well as a new Florida Power and Light substation and transmission line. In summary, it was identified there are limited lands to the north and south of the reservoir due to planned developments. The lands to the east and west of the reservoir are privately owned agricultural lands. There are conveyance restrictions to the west of the reservoir due to the Townsend Canal and concerns for water loss during conveyance, which could affect the MFL requirements if water is not sent directly back to the C-43 Canal. For all locations, consultation with protected species will be required. And ultimately, the study found that the South Florida Water Management District-owned lands provide the best opportunity for citing the water quality component. The team then moved forward with conceptually locating the top 4 technologies within the lands immediately north of the reservoir to evaluate the conveyance alternatives. And Sean Waldeck from JTEC will now walk through the water conveyance for each of the alternatives.
Thank you, Georgia. Good morning, everyone. As you saw in Georgia's presentation, she showed an overview of the reservoir and its location. And for my presentation, I'll focus on the water quality component alternatives that are located on the South Florida Water Management District parcels directly north of the reservoir and in between the C-43 or the Caloosahatchee River. Just to get a little bit more perspective on some of the conveyance features that we have for the reservoir and for the project. Georgia mentioned the Townsend Canal, and that's the main inflow and outflow from the Caloosahatchee River into the reservoir. The Townsend Canal connects to a perimeter canal and intake system for the reservoir on the northwest corner of cell 1. And the water is pumped into the reservoir, into cell 1, it fills cell 1 and cell 2, and is stored for future release into a perimeter canal system that surrounds the reservoir. And that perimeter canal system is controlled by a series of water control structures that essentially cascades water from a higher elevation on the south side of the reservoir all the way around the reservoir and back into the Townsend Canal. So there's some opportunities for connections to the perimeter canal for both the inflow features that are needed for the water quality components of each alternative and for the outflow. So focusing on the first option, this was the offline alum treatment facility located on the far western parcel north of the reservoir and directly adjacent to the Townsend Canal. This alternative through the water quality feasibility study ranked number 1 for cost effectiveness and most effective in nutrient removal. So it's essentially a treatment facility located on approximately 50 acres of the western parcel. It would be north of or adjacent to the FPL substation that's currently under construction. And a direct connection to the perimeter canal could be made whereby we would pump water out of the perimeter canal and into the treatment facility, and then back out of the treatment facility into an upgraded discharge back to the Townsend Canal. There's a couple of benefits to this alternative. One being there would be no additional flow easements required for the construction of this alternative. And and number two, we can use the existing discharge point on the North Rim Canal back into the Townsend Canal. The other alternative is that because of its location in the western portion of the project, we would be able to take flows from the discharges in cell 1, which you can see in this picture, which is the S471 discharge structure, as well as flows out of cell 2, which we'll see in subsequent alternatives. Next slide, please. Option 2 utilizes, for the sand filter and Bolden Gold combination, utilizes what we call the center parcel north of the reservoir. It's generally located east of the parcel 1, number 1, but it's also north of cell 1. But in this particular case, the cell 2 discharges would be connected to this feature, whereas the cell 1 discharges are too far west in order to take advantage of that. In general, that's considered to be acceptable because most of the flow under normal conditions is expected to flow from cell 1 and into cell 2, and then back out of the cell 2 discharge structure shown here at S473. In the event that cell 2 is empty and we have still a little bit of water left in cell 1, that discharge would be directly discharged into the perimeter canal and out to the Townsend. Under this alternative, we could have a similar pumped intake into the center parcel. It would go through its treatment process and then discharge by gravity, either, and we're evaluating this currently, either back into the reservoir perimeter canal, which wouldn't require any additional flow easements or minimum flow easements, or into the existing North Rim Canal feature that already exists. Next slide, please. In option 3, for the hybrid wetland treatment technology, as Georgia described, this was an alum pre-treatment with a polishing post-treatment system, would take advantage of both the center parcel as well as the western parcel by taking inflow into the center parcel as we described in option 2, and we can discharge out of that component into the western component, either at or below grade, to take advantage of a gravity conveyance system. Or there's a potential for segregating these two intakes to have an additional intake in the western parcel to allow for that treatment for S471. And similarly, we could minimize, with that configuration, we could minimize the flow easement requirements, taking advantage of the existing conveyance system. In either case, we can still utilize the conveyance that we have on site for the most cost-effective alternative should that shake out in the cost analysis. In option 4A, it's basically option 4 and 2 possible permutations, A and B, consists of the stormwater treatment area and Bolden Gold feature, and that would be located on the easternmost parcel of the district-owned land, and generally that's directly north of cell 2. So again, that would take discharges out of cell 2 from the perimeter canal and pump into both features. The Bolden Gold is on the left side or the west side of the banana branch. That's the 168 acre component. And out of the 862 acre component would be the STA. And under option 4A, The STA discharges then have to be repumped back over the Banana Branch and into the North Rim Canal, sorry, back to the Townsend. And that obviously has some more flow easement requirements associated with it. And under the Bolden Gold piece, that could potentially discharge by gravity into that same North Rim Canal. Under option 4B, we're looking at taking advantage of discharging by gravity, which obviously saves money for additional pumping, into the existing Banana Branch drainage feature. The Banana Branch is much lower in elevation than the STA and the Bolden Gold water quality component, so we could discharge by gravity, but otherwise the influent into each of those components would be pumped as they were in 4A. Obviously, there's much more flow easement requirements associated with this alternative. Results in a wider Banana Branch, some improvements needed for conveyance at an existing bridge on Fort Deneau Road, and potential property impacts north as it connects directly to the river. I think that's all I had, Georgia.
Thanks, Sean. We'll take any questions that y'all have at this time. I don't see any open questions in the chat. And I don't see any raised hands. Oh, we have a raised hand. Devin, can you unmute the Sanibel Council member?
Hey, good morning. I believe, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Georgia, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but since nobody else was speaking up, I wanted to make sure I just have some general comments that I'd like to make. Is that okay?
Yes, of course.
Wonderful. So my name is Richard Johnson. I'm the Vice Mayor of the City of Sanibel. And I just want to go on the record as saying, you know, we absolutely appreciate the opportunity to be involved in this, not only from a scientific standpoint, but also from a council standpoint. You know, we recognize the importance of the C-43 project, especially with regard to the water quality treatment component. And that is reflected in our city's 2021 legislative priorities. We certainly appreciate the leadership of Governor DeSantis in his Executive Order 19-12, which gave clear direction to South Florida Water Management District, adding a stormwater treatment plant to the C-43 reservoir so that we can provide additional treatment and improve the quality of water leaving this very important storage component. We recognize that the storage component is going to be part of the answer to our water quality issues that we experience on the West Coast in Southwest Florida. We also appreciate the hard work of the South Florida Water Management District and the time and expertise of the working group as they work to complete a water quality component feasibility study and siting eval that you're presenting today. And we also look forward to continuing to provide input as the technologies are further refined in the upcoming conceptual design phase. I'd like to make just a comment that kind of puts it into a grassroots standpoint, and that's Chauncey Goss is often referred to the island of Sanibel and Captiva as the catcher's mitt coming out of the Caloosahatchee. And I just want to share with everybody how much we appreciate the work that's going into this C-43 project, both from a reservoir standpoint as well as an STA or water treatment component. The catcher's mitt's getting pretty worn and tattered, and because it's been overused for so many years. So we really look forward to getting this on track and working together with not only the district and the other stakeholders, but all involved in this process. So thank you very much for the opportunity to comment today, and please continue the good work that you're doing.
Thank you so much. We appreciate your comments. Devin, can you unmute James Evans?
Hi, good morning, Georgia. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great, thanks. Appreciate the opportunity to provide some comments. I'm James Evans. I'm the Environmental Policy Director for the Sanibel Captiva Conservation Foundation. I don't believe your chat function is active. It looks like it says chat disabled, just to give you a heads up. And also, my comment is really related to how the discharge will come from the treatment component into the Caloosahatchee. And I read through all the documents, and I'm still struggling with trying to figure out how you're preventing agricultural water supply from pulling treated water from the Townsend Canal. And I guess it's still unclear. I went back, it looks like you guys weighted through a pro and con weighting scheme. We're able to kind of look at how you can separate the water, looking at different treatment components and technologies. But I'm still, in the final plan, I'm still struggling with trying to figure out whether or not it's going to be discharged in the Townsend Canal. You're going to, maybe adjust the timing of when that water's pulled. But I can't see how you would address, periods of drought and things like that. So if you could maybe address that, I would really appreciate it.
James, this is Kim Fikowski. I'll address that. We're still looking at the conceptual, into the conceptual design. So we're not sure where we'll be discharging at this point. But if the water quality component that's selected discharges to the Townsend Canal, the reservoir operating plan and the water quality component operating plan will be designed to avoid discharges during the peak hours. The peak hours when water would be pumped from the canal for irrigation. The ag pumps generally, on off-peak hours based on FP&L rates. And so there would be coordination there. So we have an opportunity to look at our operations plan to address that issue. It's important to keep in mind too that the siting evaluation focused on selecting a water quality component project to provide additional treatment and improve the water quality, leaving the reservoir to the greatest extent possible while still maintaining the C-43 project purposes, benefits, infrastructure, which is a complex task. So to maintain the C-43 reservoir project purpose, post-storage water quality component treatment that we will ultimately select has to be an option with a de minimis water loss before discharge to the river. And again, the operations plan, if it does discharge to the Townsend Canal, would have to be evaluated in detail. And I'll offer if anybody else has any other comments on that.
No comments on that, Kim, but this is Marcy. Just a note for the first part of what you said, James. The chat isn't working, but the question and answer function is where you can type in any questions if you'd rather do that. So just to clarify for everybody.
And James, did that answer your question as best as we can at this stage of the siting evaluation until we get into the conceptual design?
Kim, James just noted that he's been muted again, so he can't respond out loud.
Oh, okay.
All right. With that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Marcy Frick. I'm answering.
Georgia, it looks like we have some questions.
Yep, I've been answering the questions
you got them.
I've been answering the questions in the Q&A box. I think we can go on to the next session, and if those answers are not adequate, we can continue to discuss them at the next question session.
Thanks, Georgia.
Oops.
All right, well, thanks, Georgia. So for the water quality component evaluation, we updated our water quality analysis by making a clean data pull from South Florida Water Management District's DB Hydro database, where we took total nitrogen, total phosphorus, and total suspended solids data from almost an 11-year period from January 1st, 2010 through November 16th, 2020, which was the most recent data uploaded at the time we began this study. We cleaned up those data from the poll and organized them in Excel workbooks. We then conducted statistical evaluations in Excel, and we also used a Shapiro-Wilk test to determine whether the data were normally distributed, which was based on a recommendation from South Florida Water Management District staff. Based on the water quality data evaluation, JTEC recommended using the S78 monthly median time series as the inflow to the reservoir. We selected the S78 data because it's, as Georgia showed on her map at the beginning, S78 is located upstream of the reservoir and is more representative of the water quality that'll be coming into the reservoir. We are aware that there are several tributaries that contribute to the river between S78 and the Townsend Canal, but these are the best data available to represent the inflow. We also selected the monthly data set because it best represents the seasonal trends in water quality. And the median was selected because the data are not all normally distributed based on that Shapiro-Wilk test we performed. In addition, we also recommended using the S79 monthly median time series, which is downstream of the reservoir, as the target for our water quality component treatment. And this was to ensure that the quality of water that's leaving the water quality component will be the same or better than the quality of water in the river. The next slide shows the S78 time series of those monthly median data that we compiled. The gray line on each of the figures shows that median value that we selected, and the plot in the top left is the total nitrogen data, and in the bottom right are the total phosphorus. So these are the inflows that we use to the reservoir. And then on the next slide, that shows the S79 data, again, the nitrogen on the left side and the total phosphorus on the right, with our median time series in that gray. And then these were used to establish our treatment targets for the component. So on the next slide, when we were establishing our targets, we updated what we used in the feasibility study by using the monthly median time series from those S79 data. These targets were updated from what was in the feasibility to help with refining the size of each of our treatment alternatives. We used the S79 median dry season data, which are from November through April. And these were selected since those are going to be the most conservative values for nitrogen, phosphorus, and total suspended solids in the concentrations in the river. The values during this time are the lowest concentrations, and the dry season is also the time of the year when the reservoir will most likely be discharging. Based on this evaluation, the updated targets are shown in this table of 1.23 milligrams per liter for total nitrogen, 0.88 milligrams per liter for total phosphorus, and 1.5 milligrams per liter for total suspended solids. I'll turn it over now to Chris Keller to explain how these updated data were used.
Thanks, Marcy. So what we did is constructed a spreadsheet model of the flows into and out of the C-43 West Basin Storage Reservoir and coupled that with the water quality data that Marcy just described. I'll show you schematically how that works on the slide after this one. But the purposes of constructing this model, there were several purposes. And the first one was to give the team the opportunity to be able to look at the inflow timing and water quality changes that occur seasonally with respect to sizing an inline alum system that treats water on the way into the reservoir. The second purpose was then to look at how water mixes within the reservoir based on those inflow conditions and look at what that outflow time series looks like in terms of both flows and concentrations to enable the sizing of the downstream water quality components that were presented on an earlier slide. So what this spreadsheet model does is simply manage the storage effects of the various inflows and outflows and how those relate to water quality. We include in there an option to be able to turn down the water quality, the inflow water quality concentrations to reflect the performance of the inline alum system. But what this tool is not is a mechanistic reservoir water quality model that models natural settling and algal dynamics and various other processes that could occur within the reservoir itself. And it does rely on time series data for flows and climate conditions that are consistent with what was used in earlier phases of the project, specifically the 2007 PIR report that was prepared. Next slide. So this is a simple schematic of what the spreadsheet model is and how it works. The primary inflow are those 2007 inflow rates. So that is a 41-year time series of daily inflows, simulated inflows from the C-43 canal to the reservoir. That was coupled with the S78 median concentration data that Marcy described just a moment ago to set up the inflow conditions for the reservoir. So every January day in the 41-year time series is combined with the median January inflow concentration for total nitrogen, total phosphorus, and total suspended solids. Another input to the spreadsheet model is rainfall. Obviously, on a 10,000 acre footprint, there is a substantial amount of rainfall that can occur. That does carry additional nutrient inflows with it. So we used the 2007 PIR rainfall data set and coupled that with wet deposition water quality sampling data that have been collected and performed by the district from the S7 structure. Outflows from the model, seepage is 0. There is a cutoff wall in the reservoir embankments that eliminates seepage from the reservoir to the outside of the embankments. And there's also a clay layer underneath the reservoir that cuts off deeper infiltration of water that is stored. So seepage is assumed 0 in the spreadsheet model. Another loss term from the model in terms of water volume is evapotranspiration. So we used the 2007 time series that was included in the PIR modeling for that. That removes water from the reservoir, but it doesn't remove the mass of nutrients with it. So those masses are retained in the calculations of what is going on a daily basis within the model. Then the primary outflow from the model, which is the input for sizing the downstream water quality components, are the 2007 outflows that were modeled. So 41-year time series of daily outflows, and water quality as calculated as the net result of these other inputs and outputs that I just described. Next slide. This is an example of one of the several different pages of model output that are there. And we have got three panels here, total nitrogen on the top, phosphorus in the middle, suspended solids on the bottom. The vertical axis is pounds per day, so these are loads. And then we have a frequency distribution or percent of time that certain loads are met or exceeded. The blue lines in each of these panels shows what the spreadsheet model is calculating as the discharge load from the reservoir that would be returned to the C-43 canal. The red line shows the load that would be required if we assume that the target is, as Marcy described previously, the median concentrations at the S79 structure downstream. So the difference between the red and the blue, or the amount of work that needs to be done by the downstream water quality component, is represented by the green line in each of these cases. And that just shows what kind of load reduction is needed there. So just as a quick example, if we look at the total nitrogen graph, we see that 50% of the time, the downstream system needs to be able to achieve a load reduction of 366 pounds per day. Next slide. So as you'll recall from an earlier slide, there were several alternatives that were recommended out of the water quality feasibility study. Those have been slightly modified as a result of this modeling exercise. But just to recap, those recommended alternatives were the 50-acre offline alum treatment system, 600-acre hybrid wetland treatment technology, the combined 1,000-acre STA with a 104-acre Bolden Gold system, those operating in parallel, and then the parallel system with a 200-acre sand filter and a 104-acre Bolden Gold cell. And as those of you that have been tuned in for the duration of the project know, the full-scale STA, the 5,000 STA, 5,000-acre STA, was retained for further evaluation based on stakeholder input. And you see just the summary table here that was included in the feasibility study with those initial final estimates of the capital, O&M, and net present value costs for each of those alternatives. Next slide. So based on this more detailed look during this phase of the project of the inflows and the modifications with respect to the downstream water quality targets that differed between what we looked at initially in the screening phases of the water quality feasibility study and what we're looking at now with the water quality component study, some changes have been made to the sizing of those various treatment technology alternatives. With respect to the offline alum system, there's no change in the overall size, but the alum dosage that was required or assumed to be required previously has been slightly reduced, which would result in some cost savings in terms of chemical costs. The hybrid wetland system reduced its total footprint down to about 525 acres. The STA and Bolden Gold combination system, that's been estimated to meet nitrogen and phosphorus reduction targets with a slight increase in the Bolden Gold filter bed size from 104 to 105 acres. The sand filter and Bolden Gold similarly is expected to meet the nitrogen targets based on the vendor information that's been provided, and that also requires a slight increase in the Bolden Gold size to 105 acres. And there's been no change with respect to the alternative, the 5,000 acre STA alternative. That meets all the targets for water quality performance, but still carries with it that large price tag. Next slide.
All right, thanks, Chris and Marcy. Anyone have any questions or comments at this time? If you'd like to raise your hand. Nobody's raising their hand. We are responding to the Q&A as they come up in the chat. So I think we will, if no one has any comments or questions at this time, we'll move on and let to the next section of the presentation.
Georgia,
Yes.
can I ask you, for those folks who are possibly on their phone, to go through the questions, just read the questions aloud and the answers so that everybody can hear the discussion?
In the chat
Yes,
or in the Q&A, you want me to read them?
the Q&A, yes.
Okay. So the first question that we have is, says that a recent paper by Rumbold and Deering found the C-43 basin to be equal or greater source of various constituents to the river. Has any consideration been given to including in the operational schedule a priority of filling the water quality component and reservoir from drainage from the basin rather than the lake, possibly catching the first flush after heavy rainfall events? That's a tricky one. I don't know if Sean or Joe wanted to speak to that.
Georgia, this is Sean. I think maybe one of the responses I can give, Joe maybe has some more, is so the water quality components will take water from the reservoir. So it'll be the reservoir that receives the inflow from either the river or from the Townsend Canal. Having worked on site for a few years now, the Townsend Canal during, particularly heavy rainfall events does flow with quite a large discharge. And I would suspect that under those types of conditions, the reservoir pump station would pump as much as it could from the Townsend Canal discharges prior to those discharges entering the river. When there's other discharges coming down the river, it doesn't distinguish between whether they're basin flows or lake releases. Those flows do get pumped into the reservoir at the peak rate of 1,500 CFS.
This is Joe. I'd like to add to that too. Yeah, Darren, high's good to hear from you. If you could be so kind as to share that paper with me, I'd like to take a look at it and see if there's anything we can do with that.
And this is Jennifer Reynolds. I'll just add on as well that as we look at the watershed protection plan for the Caloosahatchee, those are absolutely some of the things that we are continuing to look at. And so this isn't the only project in the basin that is under construction and that is being considered to help improve water quality across the watershed. And so we are looking at ways to address the nutrient contribution from the runoff within the basin before it reaches the river with some other types of projects as well. And so in combination with FDEP and FDACS, the Water Management District is looking at other opportunities to address those types of phenomena.
Thanks, Jennifer. The next question is related to alum and flock. So Jim Bays, I think this one's for you. There will be large quantities of this flock generated over the lifetime of the project that can't be stored in the space, which I think is the 50 acres. Has consideration been given to where this will be disposed, and has that cost been included in the overall model?
Yeah, hey Bill, this is an issue with the alum application and in any situation, what to do with the disposal of the residuals. Whereas we looked at this a couple ways. One is that there is space on site here, not just within our 50-acre parcel, but within that western area to continue to accumulate solids as we need to. We do reuse solids in the alum process that we're looking at, so that we're not continually generating a complete new crop of solids. Also, we have included in our cost estimate the cost to transport and dispose of solids in the landfill as needed. So there is some consideration of that, but it is a large quantity and it is a long-term consideration here. It still remains to be cost effective though, based on the way we looked at our approach here. I hope that answers the question.
Jim, another question for you. Total suspended solids was nearly double for the alum treatment than the STA. And does that indicate a holding cell is needed after alum treatment prior to discharge to the canal?
Yeah, the suspended solids is larger than that based on our modeling outputs here. I think we were looking at 3 or so milligrams per liter out of the alum system, and about 1.5 or so coming out of the STA. Our thinking on this is that we are still within the normal range of TSS fluctuation and range in the river at that during these time periods. There additional work can be done to increase these solids settling through additional polymers or other additives to reduce those concentrations further. But we looked at this and still feel like these numbers are still within an acceptable range. And it's a matter of, in the final design of the offline system, looking at the settling basin design and trying to possibly increase in capacity if that continues to be an issue. Please let me know if that's responsive to the question.
Thanks, Jim. The next question I think is, I'm going to ask Chris Keller to respond about the STA, and is there a capacity limit in respect to nitrogen and phosphorus uptake?
Thanks, Georgia. The 5,000 acre STA footprint was derived based on the inflow conditions, the flow rates, and the target outflows. So what we're forecasting there is that those outflow targets would be achieved over the long term by an STA of that size, the 5,000 acres in that alternative, and for their respective flow fraction, the 1,000 acre STA in that particular alternative. The short answer is that you can size for certain water quality improvement targets, and that there is not a saturation effect, if you will, that degrades the performance over time. It is not as if there are only so many places that nitrogen or phosphorus can go in the system, and then it is filled up and the performance starts to degrade. So no, there is not a capacity limit. The wetland is sized for specific inflow ranges and inflow water quality and outflow targets, and would be expected to meet that over the long term.
Thanks, Chris. The last question is, will the model, the water quality model, be made available to the public? And Kim Fukoski, I'm going to ask you to respond to that.
Yes, all documents for the study will be located on the project website, which will show at the end of the presentation again.
Okay, I think that is the end of our question session for the moment. We'll have time again at the end for more questions. So as you recall from earlier in the presentation, we performed a cost benefit analysis for the alternatives, including a full-scale 5,000 acre STA. As we updated the cost estimate for the STA, we included additional design features in the cost estimate, as well as land acquisition costs. A full-scale STA would require at least a 450 CFS pump station to lift water out of the discharge canal and convey the water to the treatment wetland. Conveyance to available lands may cover longer distances than the other technologies, and discharges similar to other discharges as well, similar to the other alternatives. Would need significant conveyance improvements. Additionally, the land acquisition estimate is $10,000 per acre and would substantially increase the cost of this alternative. So in addition to land costs, STA efficiency is limited in treating dissolved organic nitrogen, the target nutrient in this region. If the STA was sited within the vicinity of the reservoir, significant regrading of the land to create uniform and level cells would be needed. The updated cost estimate with the contingency and 50 years of operation and maintenance is approximately $300 million, making it the highest cost alternative. There are also socioeconomic concerns related to encumbering large areas of land in this area. Therefore, the full-scale STA will not move forward to conceptual design. The remaining 4 alternatives will be moved to conceptual design, and a detailed cost-benefit analysis will be performed on those 4 alternatives. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim Bays with JTAC to discuss the reservoir alum treatment application.
Thank you, Georgia. So at the request of the district, we've been investigating in more detail the concept of an inline treatment system, this was introduced during the feasibility study. This would be an injection of alum into the intake of the reservoir to functionally control algae within the reservoir, basically to manage the water quality in the reservoir to prevent algal blooms, but not necessarily to achieve targets of the water quality compoundment project. This is focusing on the reservoir. So as part of that, we did a literature review and looked at case histories from Florida and other states, which spanned over a 20-year time frame. And this has included a detailed interview with key staff at the St. John's River Water Management District, who have been using alum for phosphorus reduction for over 20 years in their restoration projects. These studies and case histories have shown that alum is an effective and proven technique for controlling algae in lakes through either whole lake application or injection into the inflow. Performance for nutrient reduction in these studies has been shown to be in the range of 20 to 40% for total nitrogen and 60 to 90% or more for total phosphorus. Importantly, we haven't found any evidence of toxic responses in lakes or wetland biota from the alum concentrations. What has been noted in some of the lakes has been a reduction in diversity and density in the benthic invertebrate community in response to the changed bottom habitat caused by block deposition, but that has been for short-term periods after initial application. Longer-term studies show a return to benthic diversity. In our review, we found no evidence that the alum at this low dosage and in reservoir concentration would have an adverse effect on reservoir components and materials. We wouldn't want this to have as they say, an unintended consequence. So we looked at that carefully, and the importance of that is the concentration of alum will be very low in our dosing and as diluted into the inflow of the reservoir. In comparison studies performed by district staff at the mesocosm facility, which we'll say more about a little later, we see generally similar results for both alum sulfate and aluminum chlorohydrate. So the general conclusion from the review is that the inline alum approach should be a manageable approach to controlling algae in the reservoir. Next. All right. These figures summarize expected treatment at the estimated dose as water enters into the reservoir as it's being dosed and reacting and settling in cell 1 and cell 2. We anticipate a reduction to up to 80 parts per billion total phosphorus, depending on final dose. And also we expect a reduction in total nitrogen, potentially down to 1.2 milligrams per liter. All of the inorganic nitrogen would be removed in this process, and there would be some reductions in organic nitrogen as well. The dose that we're anticipating for this would be small compared to typical alum application projects for rapid settling, because we can rely upon the time frame of water storage within the reservoir to provide and complete some of these reactions. We are looking at an alum dose of only about 0.6 milligrams of alum per liter. And this would be a relatively low dose of alum coming into the reservoir overall, about 6.8 gallons per minute during the pumping phase. Next. So the application of alum would result in formation of sludge deposits, residuals, which would settle in the reservoir. However, when you apply that the mass that we're looking at here to the overall surface area of the reservoir, the average deposition rate will be on the order of about 1/8 of an inch per year, or 0.3 centimeters per year. Yeah, and that would be the measurement in cell 1. In cell 2, it would be half of that. So because of the transport and settling it decreases as it goes further into the reservoir. These accumulation rates are interesting because they're essentially the same as what we see for natural lakes in Florida. This is not an excessive accumulation rate, so it's relatively natural range. The time for settling is conservatively estimated to be on the order of, say, 30 days, and for the sludge to stabilize is estimated to require 60 to 90 days. And that's based largely on work performed in Florida on lakes receiving alum injection. But that's entirely consistent with some of the durations of storage that we expect within the reservoir during the filling and storage and draining process. Over the course of 100 years, that accumulation is expected to be on the order of a foot or so. And the long-term fate of the alum is crystallization within the sediments through a chemical process in the long term. So, of course, this was asked because does this mean that we get to make special considerations in the design of the reservoir? As we are now looking at a detailed design of the inline treatment system, and we're going to take a closer look at how these solids are distributed within the reservoir through a modeling step, and get a little more granular, if you will, in the detail of the settling. But these are the overall characterizations that we think are true. Okay, next. Okay, this figure shows the conceptual placement of the alum treatment system and the storage system. I think there's an animation here, Georgia, on one step. Yeah, this figure shows the location of the tank farm, and this would house five tanks, each about 13,800 gallons, for a total on-site storage of around 70,000 gallons of alum during the dosing period. The tanks would be kept within a confinement wall for leak protection. Alum would flow from each of these, from this tank farm through a metering system, and would be diluted and then injected into the intake of the alum at the intake bay, into the inflow to the reservoir at the intake bay. And that mixing that it would entail as it moves through the pumping station and through the pipeline is sufficient to provide the energy and the mixing that we need for this process. That alum would then discharge into the cell one of the reservoir and continue to react and settle. The alum would create tiny particles that would react with and sequester the soluble reactive phosphorus and convert some of the colloidal phosphorus, in this case, into flux. That's really ultimately the form of the residual that would be settling as it moves through the reservoir cells. This location here is intended to provide accessibility and a kind of a proximal location for the maintenance of the site so that it's not spread out over a large area. It's related and adjacent to existing operations at the pump station. Next. The cost of this system is estimated based on our current conceptual plan to be on the order of $3.5 to $6.5 million. Annual O&M costs are estimated to be within a range of $400,000 to $700,000. And that range is as shown here because that depends upon ultimately the final amount of alum that's used, the cost of alum at that time, the operational maintenance requirements, the need for mechanical replacement of parts over time, and generally and so forth. Some of that will change over time. This does include the cost to monitor some of the water quality coming in and at the different reservoir at different stations. The net present value over a 50-year time period for this system is estimated to be between $30 and $46 million. And that would include significant and periodic replacements of mechanical features and some of the more metal structures that may be affected by long-term exposure to the alum during storage. So I think that's the overview where we are at the inline system. As I mentioned, we're entering into a very final detailed design phase in this will, I'm sure, bring more detail into the concept. I think that's all the slides. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Jim. I'm going to give you a quick summary of the efforts to date and then a little look ahead to the next steps. The South Florida Water Management District initiated a pilot study to further evaluate two technologies that were included in our final recommendations, the Bold and Gold and Alum. The purpose is to look at the performance of these technologies for nutrient removal specific to the water quality in the C-43 canal. The Bold and Gold study is evaluating both low flow and high flow rates, and the results are comparable at about 30% for total nitrogen. Alum was tested at a rate of 12 to 14 milligrams per liter, which, as you recall, Jim presented that we'd be using 0.6 milligrams per liter. The alum test that the district is doing has results of 43 to 51% of nitrogen removal, and the study evaluated changes to pH from the alum application, which was determined to have a manageable effect. The alum used in the study is the same type of alum being proposed for the water quality component alternatives and the inline system, and is more effective than other forms of alum. So in summary, the siting analysis report was completed, and we are focusing on the South Florida Water Management District owned lands. We talked about the water conveyance evaluation. Earlier, Sean discussed our options for water conveyance to and from the water quality components. Marcy gave us an update on our water quality target, and Chris gave an update on sizing of the alternatives. And we also presented that the full-scale STA is not progressing to conceptual design in the next phase. And then Jim gave us an update on the inline alum injection, which is proceeding to the design phase coming up here in the next week or two. So for the next steps, we have the inline alum design kickoff scheduled for next week. The draft conceptual designs of the 4 alternatives will be submitted to the district on April 30th for their comment and review. We'll have the final conceptual design submittal in the beginning of July, with a water quality component selection in August of 2021. So we're scheduling a final public meeting to follow up and provide you an update on the selection of the water quality component in September. And if funded, the water quality component will move forward to detailed design under a separate contract. And the goal will be to have the water quality component constructed and completed and operational concurrently with the full operation of the reservoir. So with that, we can take any more questions, either by raising your hand or typing them in the Q&A box. And Jim, Jim Bays, I'll read our first question, which is again about alum. Oh, it looks like it was answered.
Yeah.
He answered it, okay. Any more questions?
Actually, if you could read those questions just so that people who may not be able to see the question and answer that are participating on the phone could hear the question and answer, that would be great.
And Georgia, I did copy it before it disappeared if you want me to read it.
Thank you. Yes.
So it says, has anyone raised concerns about using alum sulfate over alum chlorohydrate? Accumulation in sludge, for example, if bottom waters go hypoxic, generating hydrogen sulfate's role in methylation of mercury. And so,
Yeah, this is Jim again, and thanks for the question. It is certainly, it has been discussed. Certainly we're familiar with the issues with the sulfur cycling and its relationship to mercury, particularly in some of the more periphyton-based systems. Our thoughts on this are that there's a few points that we can offer in response. The sulfate does not stay with the alum. It does not accumulate in the sediments where it can be reduced. You know, what we're converting, when we add the alum to the water, we're creating these aluminum hydroxides, basically hydrous aluminum oxide, it's generally referred to. And that is what's settling. We're not settling sulfate compounds. The sulfate doesn't stay with the alum. It doesn't accumulate in the sediments where it can be reduced. It's just essentially washed out. That is, it's moving in now soluble form and discharging. And alum is only adding very small amounts of sulfate to the overall water volume here at these dosing rates. And you know, our expectation here is that this is not contributing to a significant sulfate load that would then biogenically convert to sulfide in the sediments. And I don't believe we've seen issues in other full-scale lake application projects that have raised where this has been shown to be an issue here. So I think we're good on that topic here for this application.
Thanks, Jim. Paul Julian has his hand raised.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Awesome. Thank you. So thanks, Darren, for stealing one of my ideas for a question regarding sulfate. But I guess there's three things that I'm thinking about. So the application of alum, we do have the issues of potential aluminum export and sulfate, not just in the water column. So, I mean, aluminum becomes toxic at certain pHs. And so if, for instance, if we have a low pH condition, which I don't think we necessarily might have, but there could be potential for that, aluminum can become toxic to macroinvertebrates, fish, and others. And I think at least in the report, there was some discussion of the treatment model. I think it's the SUMO model is what was referenced. And so my understanding of alum applications, at least in some systems, the alum efficiency of treatment really relies on alkalinity and pH. And granted, the alkalinity in at S78 is relatively high normal. There are fluctuations in that. So I was wondering if there was any expectations of an additional analysis or modeling associated with the sensitivity of that SUMO model relative to alkalinity and treatment efficiency for both phosphorus and nitrogen. And I think that's pretty much the extent of my questions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I think I mean to say generally that, we have considered the pH issue. It's a longstanding observation that alum applications, if they're unbuffered, alum will lower the pH. This can be too much, and if the water's not adequately buffered naturally, that appears to be the benefit of our site here, in that we do have sufficient alkalinity here that balances that. The pH drop looks to be very nominal here, if we see it at all, based upon the model results. Even the jar tests that have been done by the district, is their kind of parallel pilot study they're running, showed a drop of just a couple tenths of pH units, just a few tenths, as I recall. And I think this is also consistent with our general expectation. It's a very nominal effect. What's interesting about the SUMO model that we use is that it really does look at all the pertinent cations and anions in the water column that could affect the addition of the alum here. So we are looking at multiple reactions at the same time with that model, and it's versatile like that. I think that as we approach the detailed design here, there is a final step where we're confirming the model and confirming our dosing. And I think that that information will be conveyed in a final report. I hope this is a responsive answer here. We just don't see the pH as being a big issue here, as it has been or could be in lesser buffered waters. Is that? Paul, is that a fair answer, or just give me a thumbs up, maybe, or something if I hit the target there? I'm trying to make sure we get your answer. Okay.
Yep, he said he's good. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next call is from Newton Cook.
Yes, thank you. A really good presentation. I was wondering if this technology, if you can cite another place where this technology is used to reduce the nitrogen from basically stormwater runoff and river water. The reason I mention this is we have a big problem in the northern Indian River Lagoon with the wastewater plants. And of course, they don't take nitrogen or phosphorus out of the effluent. So is this used? Will wastewater plants could remove the nitrogen before they dumped it into the Indian River Lagoon? Is there other places where this technology is used? Thank you.
I will. I'll take it as a start, and if we need to dive deeper, I'll ask Bruce to help out here, Bruce Johnson. But let me provide an initial response that the nitrogen reduction here is largely being expected to occur through coagulation and settling of organic particles. And this is a different reaction and different mode of action than we're looking at for soluble phosphorus removal. In the reservoir, we're trying to control phosphorus primarily to limit algae, and that's their limiting factor, and that's what an alum excels at that. For the incidental nitrogen reduction we see and expect to see, that is really the coagulation of larger particles and settling. So in your case there, sir, if the nitrogen is in a largely particulate form, or if there is a significant organic nitrogen component, I think there's definitely some expectation that we'd see some nitrogen reduction. It certainly is going to be less than what we would project for the phosphorus. For example, when we think about phosphorus reduction, we're looking at some pretty significant percent reductions, typically 50%, or more. For nitrogen, we've got a couple factors. One is the different forms of nitrogen. Some are, like I mentioned, the particulate or organic forms are amenable to this sweep settling. The sweep flock settling is how it's termed. But some other forms of nitrogen are not. Ammonia is not readily removed by the alum. It really depends on the form of the nitrogen there. And it's so there is probably some potential there. I would say it would need some study, and like we're seeing here with the district, some piloting would probably benefit the assessment there, because every water quality has its unique features. And here, for this site, we're dealing with some relatively high percentages of organic nitrogen in the water. And, it's a moderate response. Well, I hope you can hear me. I have some background noise here, and so I'm just thinking that it's probably it has some potential, but not. It's not going to be the main panacea that you would expect unless if the water is, for example, primarily dominated by ammonia. Does that respond okay? Is that provides a helpful answer?
Thank you very much for unmuting me. The reason for my question was nitrogen is what feeds the red tide. Phosphorus is not really the big problem with the red tide that we have on the West Coast. It's nitrogen. And the same thing is happening in the northern Indian River Lagoon. Sure, there's phosphorus, but the big problem is the brown algae, we call it, and it's fed by nitrogen. And so nitrogen reduction is a big key to what we're trying to do in both the Caloosahatchee, which is a saltwater estuary, and also the Indian River Lagoon in the north, which is a saltwater estuary. So thank you for your answer. And I just hope that we're paying attention to the nitrogen, which really causing the trouble with our red tide blooms and our brown tide blooms in the Indian River Lagoon. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just add one more thing to that. Thank you for your comment. And I'll say that in our analysis here for the water quality components, these host reservoir systems that we're talking about, nitrogen removal is a key selection factor, key factor for for both the original selection of the technology and as well as the effectiveness in this application here. So our objective is to make sure that the water coming out of the reservoir has the same or better nitrogen than what's in the river at the time of discharge. So wouldn't be adding more to the downstream systems. Okay, I think that's my answer.
Thanks, Jim. And I got a note that some people are not going to be able to stay on the call, so I forwarded the PowerPoint presentation to include the project website, which has all of the information that we've been discussing today, including past reports and information on alum and things like that. So you can visit sfwmd.gov and then go to the C-43 specific project webpage.
And that's not to preclude us from having additional questions. We wanted to accommodate those who had to leave at 11:30. So if you have additional questions, please put them into the Q&A or raise your hand. All right. Last call for any additional questions. Either raise your hand or do Q&A. If during our first round of questions that we didn't read aloud, if we need to elaborate any more and have any exchange, please feel free. All right, I don't see any additional questions. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and thank JTech for all their work on evaluating conventional and innovative technologies. To add to our water quality technologies toolbox for this area, both the siting evaluation as well as the next step in designing and permitting an inline alum injection system for the reservoir itself. I want to thank each of the working group members for their dedication and collaboration throughout this project, and to the public for your feedback and engagement during these Zoom meetings. It's appreciated. We look forward to the opportunity to present the conceptual designs and the selected post-storage technology that will move forward to design at our next public meeting in September, as Georgia had indicated. And again, on the screen, you're seeing the C-43 Reservoir Water Quality Component website. And it contains all of the feasibility study, all of the siting evaluation information on that website. If there's something that you need additional that you don't see on the website, or if you have any questions for me, my email address is also on this slide. Feel free to reach out to me. And again, thank you all for your participation today. Have a great day. Bye.